Who are you? Is there a permanent self that defines who you are, or is your identity constantly shifting, molded by experiences and perceptions? In Buddhist philosophy, the concept of anatta or not-self challenges the deeply ingrained belief in a fixed, unchanging identity. Modern neuroscience and psychology further support the idea that the self is a fluid and ever-evolving construct rather than a solid entity. This article explores the illusion of self through the lenses of Buddhism, neuroscience, and psychology, providing practical insights on how understanding this illusion can lead to inner peace, wisdom, and freedom from suffering. 1. The nature of the self. What do we believe? For most of us, the idea of self feels intuitive. We assume that there is a central, enduring I that exists independently of external influences. This belief is reinforced by personal identity. We attach ourselves to names, careers, nationalities, and roles, e.g., I am a teacher, I am an American. Memories and experiences. We believe our past defines us and that our personality is stable over time. The feeling of agency. We assume we are the conscious controllers of our thoughts and actions. However, Buddhism and modern science challenge this notion, suggesting that the self is not a fixed entity but rather an ever-changing process. The self as a construct. Rather than being a solid, independent entity, the self is a construct created by the mind. From birth, we accumulate experiences, beliefs, and social conditioning that shape how we see ourselves. Small blue diamond example: a child may initially have no strong sense of identity. Over time, through interactions with family, school, and society, they begin to define themselves. I am smart, I am shy, I am an artist. These labels feel real but are constantly shifting as life circumstances change. The fluidity of identity. Think about how your personality, beliefs, and even the way you perceive yourself have changed over the years. Small blue diamond example: the person you were at age 10 is vastly different from who you are today. Your interests, fears, and values have evolved. Yet, at each stage, you believed you had a fixed self. This raises the question: if your self keeps changing, was it ever truly fixed to begin with? Scientific perspectives on the self. Neuroscience suggests that the self is an illusion created by the brain to provide continuity. Studies show that there is no single self-center in the brain. Rather, identity arises from multiple interconnected neural processes. Memory is unreliable and constantly reconstructed, meaning that even our sense of a consistent past self is an illusion. Brain damage or mental illness can dramatically alter personality, further proving that the self is not a stable, fixed entity. Small blue diamond example: in cases of brain injury or amnesia, individuals may lose significant parts of their identity, yet they continue to exist. This suggests that our self is not something intrinsic, but rather a collection of memories and perceptions. The self in Buddhism. The illusion of permanence. Buddhism teaches that clinging to the idea of a permanent self leads to suffering. According to the Buddha, our sense of self is made up of the 5 aggregates, skandhas. 1. Form, rupa, the physical body. 2. Sensations, vedana, feelings and emotional experiences. 3. Perceptions, sana, recognition and labeling of things. 4. Mental formations, sankhara, thoughts, habits, and emotions. 5. Consciousness, vijnana, awareness and perception. Each of these aggregates is impermanent and constantly changing, which means that the self we cling to is nothing more than an illusion. Small blue diamond example: imagine clinging to the belief that I am a successful professional. If you lose your job, the suffering is immense because you have attached your self-worth to a role that is impermanent. Breaking free from the illusion. By realizing that the self is not fixed, we can begin to loosen our attachments and fears. Small blue diamond example: someone who sees their identity as flexible and evolving will be more resilient when facing change, whether it's losing a job, experiencing a breakup, or encountering personal failure. Reflection. Have you ever noticed how your sense of self shifts in different situations? Are you the same person today as you were 5 years ago? How would your life change if you embraced the idea that self is fluid rather than fixed? By understanding that the self is a constantly changing phenomenon rather than a solid entity, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering and embrace the true nature of impermanence. 2. The Buddhist view, anatta and the illusion of self. One of the core teachings of Buddhism is Anatta, which means not self. The Buddha taught that what we consider self is actually a combination of 5 aggregates, skandhas. 1. Form, rupa, the physical body. 2. Sensations, vedana, feelings and emotional experiences. 3. Perceptions, sana, recognition and labeling of things. 4. Mental formations, sankhara, thoughts, habits, and emotions. 5. Consciousness, vijnana, awareness and perception. Since these elements are constantly changing, there is no permanent self that endures. Suffering, dukkha, arises when we cling to the illusion of a fixed identity. The danger of clinging to identity. When we define ourselves rigidly, whether by our jobs, relationships, beliefs, or achievements, we create suffering. Change is inevitable, and when our sense of self is tied to impermanent things, we experience loss, anxiety, and fear. Example: imagine someone who strongly identifies as an athlete. If they experience an injury that prevents them from playing sports, they might feel lost, depressed, or worthless. This suffering arises because they have attached their identity to a temporary condition. Letting go of the fixed self. Understanding Anatta allows us to embrace change with openness. Instead of resisting shifts in life, we can flow with them, reducing suffering and increasing inner peace. Small blue diamond example: a person who accepts that roles, emotions, and circumstances are impermanent will be more adaptable. If they lose a job, instead of despairing, they see it as an opportunity for growth. Reflection. Are you holding on to an identity that no longer serves you? How would your life be different if you stopped defining yourself by external factors? Can you practice seeing yourself as a process rather than a fixed entity? By integrating the wisdom of Anatta, we free ourselves from the illusion of self and open the door to a more fluid, peaceful existence. 3. The neuroscience of the self: is the ego an illusion? Modern neuroscience supports the Buddhist idea that the self is an illusion. Studies on brain activity suggest there is no single place in the brain responsible for a stable, unchanging self. Our sense of self is a collection of shifting mental processes, not a fixed identity. The ego is a construct created by the mind to maintain continuity and survival. Small blue diamond case study: patients with brain damage sometimes experience a complete shift in personality or beliefs, suggesting that identity is not as fixed as we assume. By questioning the nature of the self, we open ourselves to a more liberated way of living, one that is fluid, adaptable, and free from unnecessary suffering. For the ego trap: how clinging to self causes suffering. One of the main sources of suffering is attachment to the ego. When we believe in a fixed self, we create expectations, fears, and insecurities that lead to unnecessary pain. Ways the ego creates suffering. Fear of failure: if we define ourselves by success, any setback feels like a personal failure. Interpersonal conflict: taking things personally leads to anger and resentment. Resistance to change: the illusion of a fixed self makes us fearful of life's natural shifts. Small blue diamond example: someone who strongly identifies as an expert in their field may react with defensiveness when challenged, seeing feedback as a threat rather than an opportunity for growth. 5. How to transcend the illusion of self. Understanding that the self is an illusion is liberating. Here's how to apply this insight. Meditation on Anatta, not self. Observe your thoughts and emotions as they arise. Ask yourself, who is experiencing this thought? Recognize that thoughts come and go, but there is no permanent self behind them. B. Letting go of attachment to identity. Avoid defining yourself rigidly by roles, achievements, or opinions. Accept that you are a dynamic, evolving being. C. Practicing compassion and interconnectedness. When we realize the self is an illusion, we also see that separation between self and others is an illusion. Compassion arises naturally when we see all beings as interconnected. Small blue diamond example: a person who no longer clings to "I am always right" becomes more open to different perspectives, leading to greater harmony in relationships. Conclusion: the belief in a fixed self is one of the greatest illusions that lead to suffering. By understanding Anatta, embracing impermanence, and letting go of ego-driven attachment, we free ourselves from unnecessary struggles and find true peace and liberation. Folded hands: who are you, really? Perhaps the answer is no one and everyone.